So do we want to go ahead and get started?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, do it.
So I'll call the meeting to order. And Amber, did you want to give us a roll call, please?
Sure, I can do that. Kalea Youngblood.
Present.
Kelly Stokes.
Present.
Marion Napoleon.
Present.
Rick Albers.
Present.
Rob Cook. Candy Cook.
Here.
Mary Lou Henry.
Here.
Scott Hilton.
Here.
Sarah Norman. Ruben Pena.
Here.
Charles Porter.
Here.
Lori Selecki.
Here.
Lori, did you say present?
Yeah, present. I'm sorry.
Okay. And our commission liaison, Commissioner Wilkinson.
Good morning.
All right.
So Rob and Sarah look like they were the only two.
Okay. Thanks, Amber.
Sure.
All right. So we're on a new platform, as you can see. And we do not recommend using the chat function because it's hard to, or we cannot record it. And so Mark and Amber, I'm going to rely on you to help me manage conversation when people need to talk. So if you will use your raise your hand function, if you hover over the screen, you can see the little raise your hand. And Mark is going to help me manage that in the order of which we receive the, there's Rob. Just come on board. And so we'll do our best to do this again virtually. So thanks again for joining us. I hope everybody is safe and staying happy and sane through this unprecedented time. And so let's go ahead and dive into the meeting. And I will do my best to be as efficient and functional as we can today to get through the agenda items. So if you will just raise your hand, and then at the end of each sort of intro to the discussion, we'll see if anybody has any comments, and we'll try to move through the committee that way. We did receive an update that all of us have completed our open meetings training. So thank you so much for doing that and completing that. I know that was extra time out of your busy schedules to do that, but we did need to go ahead and complete that. So super appreciate that. The item number 4, discussion and possible action to amend the April 2020 meeting minutes. Mark, this was just a quick, or no, we don't have any amendments, do we? Is that right?
It's up to the group. The typical procedure is we do the video minutes, which are posted now, and secretary approves those. So as Marion Napoleon has already approved those. But if anyone has any changes or corrections, then this would be the point to do it.
Any changes? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Public comment. We received one from Scott. Did you want to join us, Scott?
Okay, let's see, get my notes. Just a quick question for Trek on the contracts requirement. Goes into effect on February 1. That's a little over 6 months. License holders are expiring February and March, and they're already completing their education. So question, when will the providers be able to submit those applications? We're always telling the license holders to complete it early, and here we are. So Jen, what's the update?
So that's a great question. We've been working on that on the back end for quite some time already. We've developed a form for education providers to use to request contracts credit for courses that are already approved, that are contract related. So that way a provider won't have to resubmit an application if the course has already been approved by us, and we'll just go on the back end and do the research. And if it is a contracts related course, then we'll go ahead and assign a contracts modifier in our database management system. Outside of that, we've also developed the application form, modified it so that a provider can indicate on the course application that this is a contracts related course, so that when we process those, we'll know on the front end. And we're looking at September, October for those applications.
So are you saying that did I hear you right? If we already have a contracts course approved, that we could literally just call you and say, this is that one, flip it over?
Well, you're going to send a form,
Okay.
and that the way we'll know, that'll trigger us to go and pull the file, look at it, verify, and then we can just assign it as a contracts course.
So do you think it might be easier on track if we go ahead and submit our 3-hour courses, just get it approved as a regular CE, and then just do the simple form later on?
Well, I think, we're already halfway through July, so, if in a month and a half, September works for you guys, it would be easier for us to do something once rather than twice.
Okay. And once you open up the approval, it will, once the course gets approved, it will have that modifier on, or is there going to be a waiting period? Because I know it doesn't start affecting people till February, but if we get it approved in October, it would be good at that point with the modifier.
Right. And so that's what we're finishing up is the back-end testing of that, because when we apply that modifier, we also want license holders to be able to see it when they look at their education history on the Versa Online, and so they can see that that requirement has been satisfied or has not been satisfied. So that's the back-end testing, programmatic testing that we're doing and finishing right now.
One last question. If we have a 4-hour contracts course, can we call in or do that form and have it flipped on the modifier to make 3 of it, that contract, or does it need to be a 3-hour course? I can't remember what we decided on that.
Well, remember 3 hours is the minimum. So if you have a 4-hour contracts course, then you have a 4-hour contract course. So the extra hour would just apply toward your elective CE credit.
But that 4-hour contracts course could be the 3-hour of require. Okay, got it.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Good questions. Any other public comment? I didn't think we got any in. No. Okay. Staff report on education enforcement matters. Pam, did you want to chime in for us?
Sure. Hi, I'm Pam Mayo. I'm the enforcement attorney that's the liaison to this committee. If you'll turn to my staff report, you'll see kind of the usual issues we're seeing: purchase orders, expired provider approvals, expired courses. There's one expired course case that received an advisory letter. It's the very last case. And just to point out why they received an advisory letter, it's because their courses were offered within a week after they expired. So usually if it's that soon to the expiration, I'll just send an advisory letter instead of doing an agreed order. And then the other 3 advisory letters came from student complaints, actually, and or consumer complaints, I should say. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Just a reminder to please raise your hand so that we can answer any questions in the order they're received. Any questions?
Okay,
Scott?
thank you.
Scott has his hand up.
As usual, I'm sorry. What happens to these poor students? Because in this situation, I think of these license holder students as consumers. We're here to protect the consumers. So what happens when they spend time taking these courses and these scenarios are happening?
So most of the time, if we're offering an agreed order, it's because the provider has fixed the issue and the students have received credit.
Okay, that's good to know.
So there was one case where the provider actually didn't respond, but we didn't get any student complaints. So I don't know if that's because the provider issued refunds or whatnot, but we usually give enough time to hear from the students, and we did it in that one.
Any other questions? All right, let's move along. We are number 7 of the agenda, update from staff on licensing exam availability and reopening of the exam sites. Jennifer, did you want to chime in?
I sure can. Okay, so we all know that the exam test sites closed on March 16th. They reopened on May 1st. And are you getting feedback?
A little bit.
Okay, let me try this again.
That's better.
Okay, good. So we actually authorized Pearson VUE to utilize their third-party test centers, which expanded our location abilities by over 100 test sites. So in fact, in June of 2019, this is just as a comparison, in June of 2019, we tested a little over 2,900 applicants. In June of this year, this last month, we tested almost 3,900. So Pearson VUE has been doing a really great job. You know, we wanted to open up these extra test centers to accommodate for the fact that the Pearson VUE owned sites, you know, are pretty much at like half staff based on social distancing requirements and safety precautions. So the ability to spread that out has allowed us to accommodate the backlog and, you know, and then some. So the test sites are going really well.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for Jennifer? All right, we're moving along today. Number 8, this was just a error that staff caught. Mark, did you want to speak to this? Changing the typo?
Sure, that was something we discussed in a previous meeting on April 20th. It was just fixing a cross-reference. It had said D1G, which did not refer to a notice required. It was actually H. Staff caught that and then submitted it to the commission. Commission recommends it or has put it up for adoption. So it should be pretty straightforward.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? All right.
Motion to accept as presented.
Do we need a motion?
We don't have to have a motion if y'all want to do one, because y'all have already recommended this to the commission, so you don't have to do one to adopt it if you don't want to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Drop my motion.
Thank you. All right. Let's see here. An update from the Professional Designations Working Group. Thank you to those of you who spent time on that. Thank you to Candy as well for chairing that. We got into the work a little bit, and then staff notified us that February of 2021 is when we would be able to make any changes, actually make any changes to that rule. And so we decided to postpone the work until we are closer to being able to make any changes. And so I thought, Candy, did you want to give an update just to where you guys landed?
We had started off, I think we commented on how many different designations and things that were there, but we really came to a screeching dead halt because we've got to get through that other section first. We had good conversations and what things are out there. It's just trying to define what we want to put into whether we want to put anything in, and being careful about labeling too much because we don't want to eliminate some that we're not naming, and just making sure we've got all the details. But we really just stopped dead.
So we'll pick that work back up as we just get a little bit closer to being able to make a final recommendation to the commission on that. Does anybody have any questions? All right. Thank you, Candy. Let's move on to the number 10, discussion and possible action regarding continuing education course topics. And I'd like to just kick us off with a little bit of my thoughts, and then certainly open up to the group for discussion. My sentiment with this is just making sure that we are setting minimum standards that are not micromanaging TREC or limiting the point to the point of unintentionally putting limitations on categories. And so, as we talk about if we are to provide direction on certain categories that TREC is going to be using in order to qualify a course, I just want to be careful that we're not unintentionally limiting. With different markets across Texas, a market in Galveston is totally different than a market in rural West Texas. And so we just want to be careful that we're not overextending ourselves. And then on the flip side, you could go to say, well, these are the categories that we definitely do not want approved. But again, I do think that that can be hard. You know, it's just the list becomes never ending. And so as we move forward in this discussion, I just wanted to share my personal sentiment and maybe hear from staff, and then we can open it up for discussion and see where we land. Jennifer, did you want to touch base on this?
Yeah, I can chime in a little bit just from the staff perspective. You know, even with something like the contracts course requirement, that takes about 6 months of programming and testing in order to avoid having to have a manual intervention on a license renewal application. And so I think that's one of the things that we, you know, that's important to consider, is that anytime we have one of these changes, there is a lot of back-end programming that has to happen. So if we were to do something that regularly rotates a specific topic, and that applies to each license holder's 2-year renewal term, it's going to be complex. That's not to say it can't be done, but I know that I've heard from my staff that we're getting in a lot of course applications that are really borderline acceptable, where a provider is kind of doing the minimum, presenting the minimum amount of information, and particularly with things like social media applications and things like that. So from my perspective, it would be more helpful to better define acceptable CE elective topics broadly, rather than apply a particular topic to a renewal term and rotate that through. So that's staff perspective.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, let's raise our hands. Okay. Mark, did you catch that?
Wow.
Oh, you're muted. Mark, you're muted.
I was being so good about muting myself. All right, now, but Kelly is first on the top of my list.
Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question on that. I don't know that I understood exactly what you were deterring, is that we wouldn't want to change the topic. So for example, like right now we have legal 1 and 2, and then we also have the 3 hours that we're adding in for contracts. Let me ask it this way. Does the way we've defined it right now as contracts for 3 hours, that feels like a doable way of doing it? Or does that feel stressful?
Well, we're already doing that. So that programming is already, you know, already well underway, and we're just in the final testing phases right now.
But is that format the format that you would prefer of how we did that? Calling it a general contracts for 3 hours? That's what I'm trying to get clarity on.
Yes.
Okay. So you would prefer that if we were to do something, it would be similar to that, because it would be easier to track.
Well, I think I would prefer if the committee made more identified specific topics that were acceptable for real estate CE broad elective courses. I think some input there would be helpful to give staff some guidance when reviewing courses that may be on an outer spectrum of being acceptable.
Okay, so in other words, we'd have more of an inclusive list of topics versus anything goes, and you guys are having to discern whether or not it really fits within the guidelines.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay, more clarity as to what we find to be important in regards to the continuing education.
Exactly. And, you know, there are always going to be those courses that are really helpful just from a professional development standpoint, but determining what is really going to support, you know, ultimately the consumer of the services of the real estate license holder who's taking the courses.
Right. So I know, sorry, Clea, go.
Well, I just wanted to remind the group that we had tried to set this up as a work group, but so many of you wanted to have this conversation, and that's why we're back at it. So what might feel like a work group is just only because we all wanted to chime in on this. So just a reminder.
No, I think we've all had a strong opinion about changing or narrowing or redefining to maybe, well, I don't want to speak for other people. I know I have an opinion about that, of whether social media classes should be continuing education, or those should be looked at as more just something you would invest in yourself from a marketing standpoint outside of continuing education. So I think I thank you. I'm glad I'm much more clear on what you're would like us to consider doing.
Yeah, I got Scott and then Lori next, Kalia.
Thank you. Scott?
Okay, yeah, this was going to be a working group, but I went ahead and did a bunch of research to try to save us 4 hours of discussion time. So I'm going to speak for about 3.5 to 4 minutes. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, I've done a lot of research, so let me read what I got. When speaking to other license holders, we often hear the same stories. I'm dealing with license holders that do not understand truck rules, they don't return calls, don't understand contract basics, etc. Since there was no working group, I did some research to reduce time on this topic. I looked at nearly all of the approved renewal CE elective courses to see what topics are being taught to our license holders, the continuing education to protect the general public, which is our main goal. That took hours for me to go through all of those courses. Here are some of the ones that stood out in my mind. Agent safety course, real estate self-defense, Facebook organic marketing, how realtors can use digital business cards to create referrals, budgeting for your first years in real estate, personal development secrets of top producers, fuel your Facebook page, how to beat Zillow, oh snap, Snapchat for realtors, what the hashtag, creating a profitable real estate company, site design and planning. Now, while there were a huge number of courses that were directly tied to topics that would assist in the goal of protecting consumers, here was one that really stood out to me: 43 ways to lose your license. So our job, ESAC, is to assist in protecting the public. Our focus is on education. Our committee recently debated increasing the number of renewal hours to renew a license. In an almost evenly split vote, we decided to suggest that the commission increase the hours to 21 hours, a decision that sort of was warned against as from the directive from the governor. It failed. It was also debated that instead of increasing the number of hours, why not attempt to raise the level of education topics being provided? So here we are today. So in my opinion, we got a couple of options. Number one, change nothing. Leave the approval topics as they are, which is fairly general, like Jennifer and a few other people have mentioned. Here's what that section of the rules says. Standards for approval of elective CE course. This is section 535.73C. To be approved as an elective CE course by the commission, the course must, A, cover subject matter appropriate for a continuing education course for real estate or real estate inspection license holders, B, be current and accurate, and C, be at least 1 hour long with daily presentations no more than 10 hours long. A provider must demonstrate that a course meets the requirements under paragraph 1 of this subsection by submitting a statement describing the objective of the course and the relevance of the subject matter, here it is, to activities for which a real estate or inspector license is required, including but not limited to relevant issues in the real estate market or topics which increase or support the license holder's development of skill and competence. So that's the key sentence right there that we need to probably look at some point. Option 2, we could change the explanation of what type of courses are accepted, or kind of like what Kalia and Jennifer were talking about, it might just be a lot easier to make a list of courses that would not be approvable. So in deciding this, I put together some questions that we should probably ask. In protecting the public, we often look at complaints. Complaints typically tell us maybe where we need to push more education or what the problems are. So are we getting a lot of complaints on real estate self-defense? Are we getting a lot of complaints on Facebook organic marketing? Are we getting a lot of complaints on personal development secrets of top producers? Are we getting a lot of complaints on how to beat Zillow? So should real estate CE education topics approved by TREC be rule or law driven? Is the way furniture is laid out in a house something that should be approved and taught in a renewal CE course to maintain a license, or is that subject matter better suited to be provided by real estate associations or the broker at a real estate company? Should the CE renewal courses continue to be approved as long as the topics are, quote, relevant issues in real estate market topics which increase or support the license holder's development and of skill and competence? In teaching site design and planning, does that topic really help protect the public and cut down on complaints? So I guess the main question is, while different aspects of real estate, such as arranging furniture or getting new clients by the way the license holder advertises, is important to that license holder, should that be the focus of education intended to renew a license holder's license? If the decision is to change the current requirement, one way could be to, instead of listing approved topics, ESAC may want to create a list of topics that are not approvable. This could be an internal list held by TREC staff, always available to providers, and updated as needed by ESAC moving forward. On my last note, I've got, I think that every elective CE renewal course should be able to reference back to at least one TREC rule, the License Act, or other real estate law. And that rule or law should be included in the course. If not, almost anything could be an approvable topic. And that's my few cents.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for doing the research.
Hours.
Thank you for spending that time. Lori, I believe you were next. You're muted, Lori.
Wow. How can I follow that? Thanks a lot, Scott. Scott, that was amazing. Thank you for doing all that.
I was just trying to cut down on the hours.
Absolutely. So I am right in line with, Kelly and Scott. I'm wondering if, and Scott, I'm really kind of taking in everything that you talked about. So I'm like Kelly. I'm wondering if maybe we create a folder, if you will, for each particular subject that we can just put in the CE where they'll just fall into place. Does that make sense? So you might have one for, updates. You might have one for if we want to use marketing, maybe we use marketing, maybe we don't. I know there's been some conversation about marketing. If we talk about contracts, if we talk about, everything that you talked about, Scott, with regards to protecting the public and having it relate back to, the licensee. So I'm just thinking maybe it's topical, and Jennifer, maybe that would help your group as well, is to create various topics, just like we do with the Legal 1 and Legal 2 booklets. We have certain subjects according to the Real Estate License Act that we must, educate on. And so perhaps we utilize those as a basis for various contracts or various CE course types. So that's just what I wanted to kind of throw out there. That's it.
Thank you, Lori. I see Candy, and then Rick, and then Scott. Candy?
Okay. So one of the things that, having had my own providership and going through the approval process, I don't want to see us throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think and my comment is that we talk about social media. We better be aware that we want to make sure that the agents are doing it appropriately so the consumer is not harmed. That 43 ways to lose your license, I've actually taught that one, and it talks about how do we make sure when I teach it, I teach about how do we make sure that we're taking care of the consumer. Do we need to put we can put it into categories. There are things that we need to make sure that we're taking care of, and I'm going to go back to taking care of the consumer. And I know Jennifer and I had a time where we had a class, Pat Strong and I had a class, and we just weren't writing it correctly. How to protect the consumers, why we're putting this class out there, why we think it's worthwhile to have. And as I hear this, I think we need to make sure that as we put groupings together, that we don't throw out a program that may be valid. And I know somebody said safety, you know, realtor safety. Well, how's the consumer going to do if a realtor gets abducted from their listing, from their own home? What does that do? So I think when we go back to this, there are lots and lots of topics, and I think we just need to make sure that we don't eliminate some that may protect our consumer also.
Thank you, Candy. Rick, did you have a comment?
I do. Thank you very much. And Scott, thank you for doing the research as well. And I want to go back to Scott read the rule that defines what the courses should be. And I think we should focus on that. And in trying to answer Scott's question of should we have an unapproved topics list, I don't think so, because we have a rule that says what the approved topics are. I mean, it's very, very broad, but I think we should focus on saying that this course, every course needs to refer to or comply with either a TREC rule or the Act. And if we can do that, and if the content can't refer back to that, then that's outside of our parameters. At least I think it is. There's nothing wrong with somebody going to a class on Facebook organic marketing, but I don't think that's what's thought about under the Act and under the TREC rule. People should go out and get more education. They should get education on things that they want and things that help their practice, but that doesn't mean that they should get credit for it for their license renewal. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Rick. Scott.
I basically agree with everything. I mean, you know, when I think of Facebook organic marketing, I don't know what that course is. I'm just looking at the title. It could be all rule driven. I wouldn't know until I, of course, took the course. But I think Rick has nailed it pretty well. I mean, we're trying to figure out a way to weed out junk courses. We're trying to increase the level of our education so we don't end up going to 40 hours every 2 years at some point. Why not increase the level of education? But we've also got to figure out a way, because when TREC gets a course, they've now got to read this course along with 100 others that they're already trying to prove, and they're trying to determine if this really meets the standards of what the intent of the rule is, which is we're renewing a license. Are they learning about rules or other real estate laws or something along those lines? That's kind of where I am with it. And I disagree slightly with Rick that I think we still should probably have a list of non-approvables, an internal list at TREC, but it's not like a must-have. That might be an easy way to weed out some stuff, but I also completely agree with him. If we could maybe massage that language, and Rick, you said it better than I did, which is be rule-driven or reference some sort of rule, occupations code or other real estate law directly, and then it also be included in the course. I mean, if they've got a 1-hour marketing course and it simply on the first sentence says TREC rules address marketing in section da 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 da, and then never mention it again, I don't think that's not the intent of what we're trying to do. So, I mean, I really agree with everything everybody's saying.
All right. Mark, did you happen to get the next round in the order it was received? I see Kelly, Jennifer, and Candy. Did you want to speak again? Jennifer, why don't you kick us off? Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to speak to some of your comments, which I think are really helpful. And I also wanted to add that referencing a rule, that's great, and helps us to better identify the course topic. With social media content, having to reference a rule would not negate the ability for somebody to get a course on social media approved. That would tie into advertising and marketing and can still be acceptable. What I don't want to see is how to set up your Facebook account. These really base, entry level type social media topics. it would help us to have something stronger to rely on to not approve those courses for acceptable CE. Those are the things that I kind of feel like are, you know, your own responsibility as far as professional development. But if somebody were to come to us, advertising is huge importance, and compliance with advertising rules. So when you get into that level of complexity with social media, there's definitely a place for some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Just a reminder, when you're done speaking, if you could uncheck your hand, that would be helpful. So Kelly, did you want to go next? And then we've got Candy.
Thank you. How hard would it be for us to put together? So I really love the idea, if it's not too restrictive, I guess, that Scott came up with of putting forward that it needs to refer to a rule. It needs to refer, you know, when I hear law of some sort, I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know. That might feel overwhelming to a lot of teachers, I don't know, or maybe we mean that to say property code, or what exactly we mean for that to be. So how would that maybe be what a working group could put together, is if we were to say, well, I think it's twofold. One would be, what does the current rule say? And do we need to edit that in any way to make it clear that you then need to refer to a body of rules or something of that nature? And what is that body of rules or regulations that it would refer to? Does that make sense when I'm asking? I feel like that, would that be worth us discussing and voting on? Do we want to put together something that hones that in? One, do we need to edit the current, the way it currently reads, so as to then go to some sort of rules, and what are those rules that we would be referencing? Because I really think that the great thing about that is, I agree, Facebook, you could teach a Facebook class and reference a lot of the advertising rules, and that would be a very good class that you could, you know, possibly teach, but very different than how to set up your Facebook account. And so it would be a very easy way, when you submit it, that you would submit it and refer to those advertising rules. And so how could we package that up efficiently? And is that something we would all be interested in doing? Okay, I'll unmute myself.
Thank you, Kelly. Candy.
Okay, just one thing, when, because I look at this on a bigger picture, we require somebody to get 900 hours for getting their broker's license. And it's hard sometimes to find enough hours. And so if you take away hours from some of these classes, maybe they're not for a license renewal, but somehow we need to have enough classes out there. And I know you guys, we have thousands approved, but how many are actually offered and at a time? And I spend days helping people trying to figure out if they have their 900 hours. If you eliminate some of the, and I call them the fluff, but at some point in 900 hours, you almost have to take some fluff to get to the 900. And that's my concern with knocking out some classes. Are we going to cause some hardship on our license holders who are trying to move up a line? Okay.
Thank you, Candy. I'm torn on this. I get to where I feel like we might be overreaching or overstepping a little bit. I do understand staff's need to have a little bit more clarity with regards to, you know, does it need to refer to a truck rule or the act? But I do feel like there are so many scenarios where a course could actually be very beneficial and provide great content and great hours, you know, and should provide hours. But with the same token and in the same breath, I do think that agents need to not be the 18-hour agent and should seek out information and education that helps improve their business practices. So I admittedly I am torn on this. would be happy to set up a group to help really dive into the language and maybe work with Jennifer to identify some clarity and then bring that back to us. I know I can see Scott just squirming right now because he doesn't want to push this out any further, but I do think that it might be better to have a more catered conversation. So I would entertain consensus around that unless there's further discussion. Do we have any other hands up that I see?
I don't see any up. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to agree. I wasn't squirming to not push it off. I was actually thinking exactly the same thing. So
Okay, good.
as long as the entire group had their say, let me just throw out a suggestion. Create your working group, limited to 3 to 5 people, of course, something in that range. Maybe see what y'all think about this with the intent of looking at the current language in that rule for approvable topics and massaging that to be rule or real estate related, law related referenced. And secondly, maybe or maybe not having the list of here are the non-allowables. And then let the working group debate all that out and then come back to the committee with the recommendations.
Okay. So because we tried this once before and so many of you were passionate about this, I would like to limit it to 5 people. So I guess the first 5 that would like to raise their hands to be a part of that. I've got Scott, Lori, Marion, Kelly, Rob, Scott, Lori, and Charles.
That sounds perfect. And I like all of them except one.
Okay, now.
I'm kidding.
So good. So good, team. Come on.
Is it me? Is it me?
All right, I just want to make sure that Jennifer and Mark feel good about that. Have identified.
Oh. Can you repeat the group, please? So I can make sure we write it down right.
I've got Charles, Rob, Lori, Kelly, and Scott. Did I miss anyone?
Miss Marion, I was the first
And
one.
Marion, please excuse me. Yes, and Marion. So we actually have 6. Is everybody okay with that?
Sure.
Consensus? Thumbs up? Good to go?
Can I ask
All right.
a question real quick?
Sure.
Rick, I noticed you're not on there. Did you have any more feedback on that non-allowable list? Because I know you had mentioned you didn't really care for that earlier.
I just, if a non-allowable list, I think could go forever. I mean, you could have, if you want to have a universe of everything that's non-allowable, it's an infinitely long list. But I mean, if it's just to give the staff something to say, oh, if it's this topic, then there's no way in the world, just to help the administration, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I'm just saying, I don't think we should have a list that say you're only going to get disapproved if you're on the unallowable list.
If I can just speak to the group, I think that this is really great. I really appreciate it and would look forward to working with a smaller group. I want to be clear that, you know, we're not asking anybody to get really into the weeds in this and get into the minutia of specific topics or anything, but a little more meat to the guidelines for acceptable topics would be really helpful. And I think, you know, I'm on the fence about unacceptable topics. You know, one side of me sees a real benefit in that, and another says maybe we don't need to dig that deep. But I think this group can address that and look deeper into that possibility. And then also, if it's something that we move forward with, it can be on a really informal basis and not something that is rule driven, but just, hey, here's a kind of a working list for staff. These are things that we've come across that we know, you know, are no-goes. So it could be really informal in that sense, if that's the direction the group wants to go. But I appreciate this conversation very much and everybody's input, and look forward to meeting with the group.
Thank you, Jennifer. So just to tie a bow around this, I'd like to appoint just a leader of the group to help facilitate schedules and getting people moving on this. And Lori, I'm looking at you. Can I appoint you as our leader of our little group? Thank you so much. Okay, so Lori will reach out to everybody and make sure that the meetings are happening, and she'll be the spokesperson to bring back the recommendation to us at our next meeting. Thank you. Great conversation. All right. We have next on the agenda discussion regarding timed outline template for courses. And Jennifer, I think you're back up.
Yeah, so the group asked for us to provide a sample of what would be an acceptable timed course outline. I talked with staff and got a multitude of examples that providers have submitted that have met the requirement, have really given us the information that we need to determine that the number, the topics are acceptable and how time is being spent. And so I just put kind of all of those things together, and I'm not proposing this again to be any kind of form that is adopted, or it's really just as a sample of the type of information that we need included in a timed course outline. So any number of formats could be used, but the things that we need to see are, what is a better description of several course topics, not just a brief summary of what the course entails. That doesn't give us what we need. But here you can see that, we've got a description of a topic, any related assignments, activities, and quizzes, how much time is allotted to that topic, and then at the bottom, does it total up? So I'm open to your feedback. This was just kind of a sample of what would be helpful for us to see when we are reviewing course applications.
Any discussion? All right. And Jennifer, thank you for sharing this with us. I think from my perspective as a provider, this is definitely helpful as far as a resource goes. And I think that the more transparent and the more understanding of what providers and instructors need in order to get credit is super, super helpful. So I know this is an internal document, and I appreciate you sharing it with us.
Sure.
All right. Any other questions or comments on that? We'll move on. Okay. Let's see. Number 12, discussion and possible action regarding comments received on other education standards advisory committee items since the last meeting. We had a letter that was included in your packet. Mark, did you want to kick us off on this?
Yes, I can. This actually went to 2 committees because it was addressed to the Broker Responsibility Working Group. Because it relates more to continuing education, it probably seemed more appropriate for ESAC, but it did overlap a little bit. The Broker Responsibility Working Group did meet last week, and they did say these are really good, important points and want them to be heavily considered, but they did refer it to ESAC and said that it's basically with this committee how you want to do it. The email, I did do a little looking into the email. Basically, he's wondering if there could be a different course. This is a longstanding issue, but a different course for non-residential brokers, commercial, farm and ranch, be the 2 biggest areas. He was also questioning whether the 2-year requirement made sense, maybe 4 or 6 or some other period. And then he also pointed out that maybe it could be more targeted, and someone who only sponsors a few people, or has been a broker for 10 years, or doesn't have complaints, might be treated differently on this requirement. And then the final thing, I was able to find the course with the Real Estate Center. It's done about once a year in San Antonio. The last one was in April, and it's called Outlook for Texas Land Markets. And if you Google that, you can see an agenda on it to see what they do. It doesn't really relate to broker supervision that I could tell, but obviously it seems to be a really good course.
Thank you, Mark. I have a question for Charles, because Charles, I know you do a lot of farm and ranch sales and are very well versed in this. And I would just be curious to know your opinion as it pertains to the broker responsibility course and the requirements for brokers who are not selling residential and maybe in more commercial and farm and ranch areas?
Well, you probably know for the Alliance of Land Brokers, Jason Hill and I wrote a course several years ago. That's an 8-hour course. It's a special course for an advanced course for farm and ranch. We spend, since he's an attorney, we spend a lot of time on broker responsibility issues. And I think it's in the broker, we usually have about 120 people once a year, and they're kind of the ladies and gentlemen that do the, most of the I'd say more significant transactions. They work a lot with attorneys. I think that I guess my answer to your question is I think we have always incorporated everything, all the rules, and we also bring in litigation, results of litigation, pending cases involving the occupations code and the rules. And so we really get down into the very deep, part of it. I have always done that. So I think it's just critical. One of the reasons I wanted to volunteer for the working group was to talk about how we can have more of the rules in the occupation code reminders into these classes. I've been frustrated a little bit with the way Legal One's been designed the last few years, that sometimes it's designed for property managers, completely forgets about commercial brokerage. And some of the questions I think you've heard me talk about are very much differently answered by commercial brokers versus residential brokers, but it could still be the same answer. So I'm trying to be responsive to your question. Am I kind of getting there with it?
Yeah, I was just curious, since you are very well versed in that field. My second question are for any instructors that teach broker responsibility, with regards to maybe a recommendation to incorporate more of this, or at least have a section of this type of topic in the current broker responsibility course. If that is covered, how that is covered, or is it just completely not, and we really need a section added to it, or a tweak added to this requirement? So let's see here. We've got some hands.
Kalea, I know you have some comments, but can I just add something real quick that I think might be helpful? We have actually had in the past 1 or 2 education providers that have developed a legal update course for commercial license holders. There's a little bit of creativity allowed in that. And so I just wanted to make you all aware of that and propose the notion that maybe we could have a little more bandwidth with some of those, with the requirements for broker responsibility and legal update 1 and 2, that more broadly allowed for a really focused farm and ranch legal update and something like that. So I just want to throw that out there for this conversation.
Thank you, Jennifer. You said it better than I did, and that's kind of where I was going with that.
Okay.
All right, so I've got Candy, Scott, and Rick. Candy?
I'm here. I'm fighting my computer again. I think when we talk about this, when I teach, I find that in fact, I have a broker responsibility class going on right now. Somebody's speaking for me while I'm in this meeting, and I have commercial and farm and ranch in this group, and I only have 10 people. What we've turned to is, during the competency conversation, is we started talking about what are the competencies that are required, and I think as an instructor, not everybody can do it, but I think it's a way to make some suggestions, and Charles may be able to give us some suggestions also. Is here are some things that when we have to tailor to the class we're presenting to, here are some alternate suggestions. Because I know Texas Realtors has a commercial legal, but we don't always know that up front. We don't know who we have in a class until the class comes in. So I think maybe can we just do some suggestions instead of writing a whole separate class?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Lori?
Oh.
She's muted.
There we go. Sorry about that. I was trying to use my space bar and I was on the wrong side. Okay, so I was just going to make a comment that when we teach broker responsibility, understand that the majority of the time it is going to be residential. It very seldom deals with farm and ranch or commercial. So that was my only comment I was going to make.
Thank you. We've got Scott and then Rick.
Who did you say explained it the best? Jennifer. She nailed it. Different providers can tailor these courses. We're talking about Legal 1, Legal 2, and broker responsibility, in my opinion, to the different, let's see, commercial or farm and ranch, etc. But just to throw it out there, can we pass on a note to the writers of these 3 courses, which is a huge group of people, when they're putting together a case study on a topic, why not do a couple case studies or maybe even 3 and hit all 3? That way, maybe we're just being a little bit more inclusive in hitting some of those topics. And while a residential realtor, it may not help them so much if they're hearing about a commercial, who knows, it may. Anything we can throw into their minds is going to be better than nothing. So why don't we go ahead and diversify a little bit with the case studies, etc.
All right, thank you. And Rick.
Well, Jennifer stole my thunder. I was going to make the same comment that there are organizations out that do teach Legal 1 and 2 and broker responsibility with a commercial bent to it. They are harder to find. I've helped in writing some of the additional content for that. But again, what we have to do, I think, is be guided by the Act and by Trella. And there are certain things that have to be included. And you've got to include everything that's in Legal 1 and Legal 2 and the broker responsibility. But you can go over some of the things a little bit faster and have time to specifically detail commercial stuff or residential stuff. I mean, a commercial or farm and ranch or industrial for that matter. And I think that's being done. It just isn't being done as far and wide across the state as what it could be. So that's my first comment on that. I had 2 other comments. And Scott, I can tell you that the new version of broker responsibility is being thought about with more commercial in mind, or a little more commercial in mind, and with more generic case studies, I'll say, that apply both to residential and commercial. I mean, there's a case study or there's a case in there about not properly about cheating when you're getting your education, and that applies to everybody. I mean, there's a vast majority of the stuff in broker responsibility applies to everybody, and then there's the words commercial will be in there a couple of times. So then I have a question for Mark. The first thing that came to mind when I read this letter or this email was the old grandfathering that exempts some of the old brokers from having any education. Do you know if there are any of those still licensed, or have they all gone away?
Yeah, that came up in the broker responsibility working group as well. Most have. There was a euphemism that Jennifer used for that, aged out. I would say died. So there aren't that many left on that, and it was roundly criticized too. That hey, then we saw the same thing in the state bar, where you have people still practicing who don't have knowledge anymore. And although it may be a courteous thing, it might be a nice thing, it might be a way to get a bill passed or something through. It could be a disservice to consumer protection to exclude people from that. But you still have to weigh, how recent or how quickly or how often someone has to take a course. Right.
Well, that exemption for the ones who haven't aged out yet was a specific legislator who just didn't want to take the classes, and he passed that and had to bring some others along with him.
Thank you. Charles, I see your hand up.
One thing maybe to go back, what we did since we modified the property code and added the definition of flood pond, which confused everybody terribly. I don't know if you remember that. We actually I had a civil engineering firm come in who was one of the better ones to come into that class and for Alliance of Land Brokers and sit on a panel and talk about what flood pond meant and how important it was, and how if you take what we defined it as and then compared to what the federal agencies had, it actually was a little bit different. So, and the sad thing about it was, we said, well, can we hire you to help us on those things? He said, we don't want that kind of work. So, I mean, that's the kind of detail we got into, if that helps a little bit. As far as geographic competency goes, I don't know how many of you read the article I wrote, but back last November, I wrote an article in Texas Realtor Magazine about how important it was in the change in geographic competency. And then we use real examples, because there's a very different way to do farm and ranch in Potter County than there is in Nueces County. And we took a lot of time with that. But I felt in those situations that we would, it's good to have an attorney there, if I needed a civil engineer, bring a civil engineer to ask those questions. So that's kind of the way we took that, if that helps a little bit. But then I will say this too. The occupation code nor the rules ever have an asterisk say, oh, by the way, this only applies to one type of brokerage. So I'm with Rick. We've got to teach the spectrum. But I think as a teacher, when I used to teach Legal 1 and Legal 2, I would teach everything in the manual, but also then use examples that more appropriately fit the group. My frustration a little bit, and then I'll be quiet. I think sometimes the case studies, like when we did the Plutobo, whoever wrote up the Plutobo case study, I thought it was a little bit confusing in the way they wrote it. I was the expert in Plutobo. In the Birnbaum case a couple years ago, I was the expert in that case. It was confusing. It was too long. And I know our intent was to give our audience some information, but I really think maybe some of those case studies can be a little bit better written, if you know what I mean. I don't know how to say that. And I'm not an attorney. I would write them differently even than the way they're written. But Birnbaum was like 3 pages, and it really came to it didn't really tell the story of the case.
Thank you, Charles. I believe we have Scott, and then I think we can wrap up. I think I've kind of got a grasp of the sentiment of the conversation. So, Scott, did you want to say one more thing?
Yeah, 2 things of a Part 7 statement. I'm kidding. When we're talking about the commercial and the property management, the other feedback that I get, and I get this a lot, is property management and leasing. So we might want to keep that as well to pass on to these writers and see if they can somehow incorporate that in a little bit. I get that all the time. And second, Rick, I must apologize for Jen. She has a tendency to say things that we want to say perfectly. She likes to steal the limelight. She is a camera hog, so I will apologize up front for her.
Thank you very much. Jennifer, any rebuttal there? All right. Well, what I think I can summarize here is that the sentiment is that really no changes need to be made. However, both the instructor and the provider have the freedom to be able to cater to the audience and can maybe promote or market the courses if there is going to be a flair to farm and ranch, or there's going to be a flair to property management, or across the board. I also think that staff can take this feedback with regards to the case studies back to the writers and ensure that there are ample case studies that cater to each of these facets of the business and are being taught in these 3 courses. Does that sound about right to everybody? All right. You guys are awesome. Thank you for that dialogue. The next, I guess we are done. Is there any further business, Mark?
Yeah, I did want to say, just to follow up, I'll be in touch with Lori on the working group, and I see she's already emailed me. Thank you. So we'll schedule that, but I did want to point out there's 6 people on it. So even if one person wanted to go and watch, it is an open meeting, you would have a quorum. So I would ask that if you're not on the working group, please don't attend the meeting, because then we'd have a quorum, and best not to have that. So you'll hear a great report I served from these 6 very qualified people at the next meeting. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. And that's what happened last time, is we had a quorum. All right. Did we want to go ahead and thank you to the staff for suggesting some dates for our next meeting. And it looks like we had Monday, October 5th at 10, or the 6th or 7th. Does Monday the 5th work for everybody?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Yes, please.
We got a please and everything. Okay. All right. October 5th. Yeah. All right. I think that seemed like it should be okay. Mark, if you want to, and Amber, if you wanted to designate that time for our next ESAC meeting. And I know that we will have the working group come give a report. Was there any other business that we wanted to add to the agenda? Scott.
We had previously discussed about the education department sending out an email to providers, instructors alike, which I think one already went out, and it was great, by the way, Jen. What I thought we had discussed is we were going to add this to be a reoccurring item on each agenda, and it should be like the last one. That way, if there's anything we've discussed in the meeting that we want to tell Trek, hey, this is something we want to put out there and remind people about, or give a heads up, it would be a nice reminder to have that on our agenda at the very end on each one, and then we can give them notes or any information that we want put out. Was that okay with everybody, or did I miss that somehow?
What should that agenda item say?
Jennifer's better at this. See, I was joking about her earlier. Now this would be the perfect time. This is the one where we send out informational newsletter entries, something along that line.
Are you trying to reference what they send out as far as communication?
Yeah, they're going to send out important notices that they need to send out, but we had discussed, I think at the last meeting, that when we come up with stuff, instead of sometimes maybe spending hours writing a new rule, it might just be easier enough to get information out to providers and instructors alike. So we thought the monthly or quarterly newsletter that they already send out would be a great tool for that. So if we're going to do that, so we don't forget to actually send out those little tips or things that we want providers to know, we might want to put it on the agenda as a reoccurring item.
Let me make sure I understand. What I'm hearing from you is that you would like to see an agenda item on the ESAC agenda that just kind of highlights anything we discussed that it would be helpful to add to the education newsletter that goes out and speaks to our education providers.
Right. For instance, if it had been on here as numbered like 12A, for instance, that would have been the perfect time to say, okay, real quickly before we go on to the last item, is there anything we wanted to include in that newsletter to get out, information to the providers or instructors based on what we've been talking about?
And I could include just a little ESAC, ESAC section.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about how you do it. I'm just wanting to make sure we have it on our agenda so we give you the information that we want to make sure that's put out as well. I'm not wrong. We did discuss this, right? I want to make sure I'm not making this up.
Yeah, I believe we did. I can see where this would be just a nice to have with regards to, things like the timed course outline that's coming available, or things like, some of these violations that are reminders to the provider. I don't want to micromanage staff, so I would, lean on them with regards to take it or leave it, but we can definitely have it on the agenda if we want to just point out anything that staff can take away for that newsletter.
It always scares me when Mark raises his hand.
Yeah, for some reason, my raise hand function, even though I'm supposed to be the Microsoft Teams expert, seems to have disappeared here. So I'm actually physically raising my hand. Very old fashioned. Yeah, one thing to keep in mind, we're talking about items that have been discussed previously in the meeting, because if it's real open-ended or broad, that may not have the specificity we need on an agenda for open meetings purposes. So we're talking about stuff we've discussed during the meeting, perhaps, as opposed to let's talk about anything.
Just like Kalia said, when we started to discuss, and we even discussed it even more today at this meeting, which was the new form that Jen had created. It would be nice that we can say, hey, start watching for this. This is going to be coming around. If you've got questions, let us know.
Okay.
And I think, that's on my, usually I have a communication plan for any project or change or something like that. So, obviously this is going to go out in a notice, just as it normally would. But I don't have a problem if the committee wants to have a little placeholder where you can say, hey, Jen, this was an important discussion. you think you might want to add it to the next newsletter, I mean, I'm totally open to that.
That's great. And see, what I'd like is just a running agenda item just to remind us to do that if we need to do it. We may not have anything to say, but I just think it'd be great moving forward. I mean, if we're wanting to get out the information and make sure everybody's on board or understands what's happening, I think it's a great tool.
All right.
We'll
I
add
think
it.
we're good with that. We feel good with that. All right. Is there any other business that we'd like to add to the next agenda? Feel good? I'm sure there will be stuff that bubbles up. So thank you so much for your time today. Our next meeting is October 5th. There being no further business, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great seeing everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, guys.
Stay safe out there.
Thank
Right.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.